Australia decided to fight the world's most venomous creature with ants. Tiny ants. Against something that can kill 60 humans with a single dose of venom. The scientists thought they had it figured out. They didn't. What happened next made them question whether they just made the worst ecological mistake in Australian history. And that's saying something, because Australia's track record with introduced species is basically a horror movie. Let's get something straight right away. We're talking about the box jellyfish. Cheronex fleckeri. If you want to get technical, this thing makes sharks look like puppies. It's got 60 tentacles, each up to 10 feet long, covered in millions of tiny harpoons loaded with venom. One tentacle brushing against your skin delivers enough neurotoxin to stop your heart in 3 minutes. Not kill you slowly. Stop your heart, right there in the water. Australia has a lot of things trying to kill you. Spiders, snakes, crocodiles, drop bears if you believe the tourism board. But the box jellyfish? It's the undisputed champion. At least 64 people have died from box jellyfish stings in Australian waters. And those are just the confirmed deaths. There are plenty more where the body was never found or the cause of death couldn't be determined because, well, ocean. The box jellyfish hangs out in northern Australian waters, where kids play in the shallows. From October to May, the ocean basically becomes a minefield. The jellyfish are transparent, almost invisible in the water. You don't see them until they're right on you. And by then it's too late. So Australia did what Australia does. They told people to wear stinger suits, basically wetsuits that cover your whole body. They created designated swimming areas with nets. People still died. The problem is you can't fence off the entire northern coast. You can't make every beach safe. The box jellyfish goes where it wants. And what it wants is shallow coastal water where people happen to swim. For decades, Australia just accepted this. The box jellyfish was part of life. A deadly, terrifying part, but unavoidable, like bushfires or Vegemite. Then in the early 2000s, some scientists started asking a different question. Not how do we protect people from box jellyfish, but how do we get rid of the box jellyfish? And that's when things got weird. See, box jellyfish have a life cycle that most people don't know about. The things you see in the water, the ones with the tentacles and the murder juice, those are adults, but they start life completely differently. They begin as polyps, tiny little creatures attached to rocks or coral or basically any hard surface underwater. These polyps are stationary. They just sit there filtering water, minding their business. When conditions are right, usually during the warmer months, these polyps release baby jellyfish called ephora, grow into adults, terrorize swimmers, reproduce, and the cycle continues. The key insight here is that the polyps are vulnerable. They're stuck in one place. They can't swim away. They can't sting you from 10 feet away. If you could kill the polyps, you could stop the next generation of adult jellyfish from ever existing. So researchers started looking for polyp colonies. Because nobody really knew where the polyps lived. The ocean is big. Really big, and box jellyfish polyps are tiny. Maybe a few millimeters across. Finding them is like looking for a specific grain of sand on a beach the size of Queensland. But they found them. After years of searching, diving, examining every underwater surface they could find, they located polyp colonies. Rocks, old boat hulls, man-made structures, anywhere hard and submerged. The polyps were there just hanging out, waiting to spawn the next generation of death. The obvious solution was to scrub them off. Send divers down with brushes and just remove them. This worked on a small scale, but there were problems. First, you can't scrub every underwater surface along thousands of miles of coastline. Second, the polyps reproduce. You miss a few, they make more. Third, and this is the kicker, the polyps can lie dormant for years. You think you got them all, then 3 years later, boom, jellyfish everywhere. So scientists started thinking bigger. What if instead of manually removing polyps, they introduced something that would eat them? Something that would hunt down polyps and keep them in check permanently. This is where alarm bells should have been ringing, because introducing species to control other species in Australia has a history that's basically one long facepalm. Let's take a quick detour through Australia's greatest hits and ecological disasters. In 1935, they introduced cane tuades to control beetles that were eating sugarcane crops. The cane toads ignored the beetles, multiplied like crazy, and are now one of Australia's worst invasive species. There are literally billions of them. They're poisonous to native predators, and they're spreading across the continent. Before that, there were rabbits, introduced in 1859 for hunting. By 1920, there were an estimated 10 billion rabbits in Australia. They devastated crops, destroyed native vegetation, caused erosion. Australia tried everything to stop them. Fences, poisons, diseases, nothing worked long-term. So you'd think scientists would be cautious about introducing another species. You'd think they'd remember the disasters. But here's the thing, they were desperate. The box jellyfish was a major problem. Tourism was suffering. People were dying. If there was even a chance that a natural predator could control the jellyfish population, they had to try it. The creature they chose was an ant. Not just any ant. The green tree ant, Ocophila smaragdina, native to northern Australia and other parts of Asia. These ants are remarkable. They're aggressive hunters. They work in massive coordinated colonies, and they have a particular talent that made them perfect for this job. They can hunt underwater. Not fully underwater, obviously. Ants still need to breathe. But green tree ants can survive brief submersion. And more importantly, they can hunt in the intertidal zone, that area where the water rises and falls with the tide. Rocks that are underwater at high tide and exposed at low tide. And guess where box jellyfish polyps love to attach? That's right, the intertidal zone. The theory was elegant. Release green tree ants near polyp colonies. The ants would hunt the polyps during low tide when the rocks are exposed. The polyp population would crash. Fewer polyps meant fewer adult jellyfish. Fewer adult jellyfish meant safer beaches. Everyone wins. Except the jellyfish, obviously. But nobody was crying for them. The scientists ran tests first. Lab studies showing that green tree ants would indeed eat box jellyfish polyps. Field observations confirming that the ants could survive in coastal environments. Risk assessments trying to predict unintended consequences. Everything looked good. In 2009, they got approval for a limited trial. They were going to release green tree ants at specific locations along the Queensland coast and monitor what happened. The release started small. A few colonies, carefully monitored, scientists checking daily. And at first, it worked beautifully. The ants found the polyps. They attacked them aggressively. Within weeks, the polyp colonies at the test sites were significantly reduced. The scientists were cautiously optimistic. Maybe, just maybe, they'd found a solution that actually worked. Then things started getting weird. The ants multiplied faster than expected. Way faster. Green tree ants are normally controlled by predators, by competition with other ant species, by environmental factors. They had abundant food from the polyps, minimal predation, and perfect conditions. The colonies exploded in size. Now green tree ants are aggressive. They don't just defend their territory, they expand it. They attack other insects, spiders, small lizards, basically anything that moves and isn't another green tree ant. The scientists knew this, but they underestimated just how aggressive the ants would become with unlimited food and no natural checks. Within 6 months, the test sites were swarming with green tree ants. The local insect populations crashed. Native ants that had lived in those areas for thousands of years were wiped out. Small lizards that fed on insects started disappearing. Birds that normally hunted in the area stopped showing up because their food sources were gone. The scientists had created an ecological dead zone, and it was spreading. But here's where it gets really concerning. The ants weren't just staying near the water. They were moving inland, following tree lines, rock formations, basically any route that offered food and shelter. And they were establishing new colonies kilometers from the original release sites. The carefully controlled test was becoming uncontrolled fast. They set up barriers, used chemical deterrents, even tried introducing predators of the green tree ants. Nothing worked. You can't stop ants once they've established themselves. They're too numerous, too adaptable, too good at survival, and the green tree ants were thriving like never before. Meanwhile, the box jellyfish population did drop. Significantly, beaches that had been closed during jellyfish season were now safe for swimming. Tourist revenues increased. For a brief moment, it looked like despite the ant problem, the core mission had succeeded. They'd controlled the box jellyfish. Then the jellyfish adapted, Because of course they did. Life finds a way, and box jellyfish have been around for millions of years. They didn't survive that long by being easy to kill. The polyps started appearing in deeper water, below the intertidal zone where the ants couldn't reach them. They attached to surfaces that weren't accessible during low tide. Within 2 years, the adult jellyfish population started recovering, so now Australia had 2 problems instead of 1. They still had box jellyfish, and they had an invasive ant species that was wreaking havoc on coastal ecosystems. The scientists realized they'd made a catastrophic mistake. They'd violated the first rule of ecology, the one they definitely knew but chose to ignore. You cannot predict all the consequences of introducing a new species. The green tree ants kept spreading. By 2015, they'd been recorded hundreds of kilometers from the original release sites. They'd established super colonies, interconnected networks of nests that functioned as a single massive organism. These super colonies were dominating entire stretches of coastline. The ecological balance that had existed for thousands of years was collapsing. And here's the truly terrifying part. The ants started showing up on offshore islands. Small islands that had unique ecosystems, species found nowhere else on Earth. The scientists didn't release ants on these islands. The ants got there themselves, probably hitching rides on boats or floating debris. Once established on an island, the ants devastated the local wildlife. Bird populations crashed. Endemic insect species went extinct. Entire food webs collapsed. The Australian government tried to respond. They allocated funding for ant control programs. Teams of workers spread out along the coast, trying to eliminate colonies. But you can't eliminate ants over such a large area. Every colony you destroy, 10 more pop up somewhere else. The ants were winning and everyone knew it. Scientists who'd advocated for the release were horrified at what they'd created. Some went public, admitting the mistake, calling for more aggressive intervention. Others defended the decision, arguing that the intent was good even if the outcome was bad. The debate got heated. Academic careers were destroyed. Friendships ended. The box jellyfish ant project became a cautionary tale taught in every ecology program in the world. But, wait. There's more. Because nature is never simple. Researchers started noticing something unexpected. In areas where the green tree ants had been established the longest, a new equilibrium was forming. Native predators were adapting. Certain bird species had learned to eat the ants, despite their aggressive defense. Some lizard species were changing their diets and behaviors to coexist with the ants. The ecosystem wasn't returning to what it was before, but it was stabilizing into something new. This raised a philosophical question that divided the scientific community. Is a new stable ecosystem, even one created by human intervention, better than continued efforts to restore the original ecosystem? That fighting nature is futile, and we should accept the new reality. Others argued absolutely not, that we have a moral obligation to fix what we broke regardless of the cost or difficulty. The box jellyfish population, meanwhile, did something nobody predicted. It started fluctuating wildly. Some years there would be massive blooms, more jellyfish than anyone had seen before. Other years hardly any. The scientists couldn't figure out why. They suspected the ant-induced changes to the polyp populations had created instability in the jellyfish reproductive cycle, but they couldn't prove it. What they did prove was that the polyps were now distributed differently along the coast. Instead of concentrated colonies in the intertidal zone, they were spread out in deeper water, more diffuse, harder to find. This actually made the adult jellyfish harder to predict. Before, you knew when and where they'd show up based on polyp colony locations. Now, they could appear anywhere at any time. Beach safety became more complicated. Complete eradication of the green tree ant colonies, using chemical weapons. Massive funding for ant control. Even proposals to introduce another species to eat the ants, which would be doubling down on the original mistake. Cooler heads prevailed, but barely. By 2020, the situation had become the new normal. The green tree ants were a permanent feature of the northern Australian coast. They weren't spreading as aggressively anymore, having reached some kind of carrying capacity. The ecosystem had adjusted, though it looked nothing like it had before. Native species that couldn't adapt were gone. New species interactions had formed. It was different, not necessarily worse by every metric, just different. The box jellyfish remained dangerous. People still got stung. A few still died. The only thing that changed was the predictability. The jellyfish were more erratic, which in some ways made them more dangerous. You couldn't plan around them anymore. The scientific community studied what happened extensively. Papers were published analyzing every aspect of the disaster. The consensus was clear. The introduction of green tree ants to control box jellyfish was a failure that caused more problems than it solved. It became the go-to example of why you don't introduce species to solve ecological problems, no matter how tempting it seems. But here's where the story takes another turn. In 2022, a researcher studying the green tree ant colonies made a discovery. The ants were controlling more than just box jellyfish polyps. They were also preying on the larvae of several invasive insect species that had been causing problems in Australia. Mosquitoes carrying diseases. Agricultural pests. Species that Australia had been fighting with pesticides for years. The ants were doing what millions of dollars in pest control programs couldn't do. They were significantly reducing populations of these invasive insects, but keeping them in check. This benefit was completely unintended. Nobody predicted it, but it was real and measurable. Suddenly the calculation changed. Yes, the ants had disrupted native ecosystems. Yes, they'd failed to permanently control the box jellyfish. But they were providing a benefit that had economic value. Farmers near the coast reported fewer crop losses. Disease rates in some areas declined because mosquito populations were lower. The cost-benefit analysis became murky. This led to yet another debate. Do unintended benefits offset unintended harms? Can we claim success if we achieved something valuable even though it wasn't what we were trying to do? The scientific community was divided. Some saw it as justification for the project. Others saw it as luck that didn't excuse the recklessness of the original decision. The green tree ants continued to thrive in northern Australia. Estimates put the population in the billions, spread across thousands of square kilometers. They're never going away. Even if Australia committed unlimited resources to eradicating them, it wouldn't work. They're too established, too widespread, too adaptable. The box jellyfish continue to exist too, unpredictable and deadly as ever. The dream of making Australia's northern beaches completely safe from jellyfish is dead. It's not happening. The best anyone can hope for is better warning systems, better medical treatment for stings, and education about the risks. Looking back, the scientists involved have mixed feelings. Some maintain they made the right decision with the information they had at the time. Others are racked with guilt over the ecological damage, unable to continue working in conservation after what they see as their catastrophic failure. The lesson here isn't that we should never try to solve ecological problems. It's that we need to be far more careful and humble about our interventions. Nature is complex beyond our ability to fully understand, and those consequences have consequences, rippling out in ways we can't predict. Australia's attempt to use ants to kill box jellyfish stands as a monument to human hubris. We thought we could outsmart millions of years of evolution with a simple solution. We thought we understood the system well enough to manipulate it without causing harm. We were wrong on both counts. The irony is that the box jellyfish, the creature they were trying to eliminate, is still there, still dangerous, still killing people occasionally. The only thing that changed is that Australia now has another invasive species problem to deal with. The ants didn't solve the jellyfish problem. They became a problem themselves. And that's the real terror that the scientists felt when they realized what they'd done. Not that the plan failed. Not that the ants didn't work as expected. They'd changed the northern coast of Australia forever, and future generations would have to live with the consequences of their decision. The green tree ants are still there, swarming across the coastal rocks. The box jellyfish are still there, drifting through the warm waters. And the scientists who released those ants are still there too, living with the knowledge of what they created. Some call it a disaster. Some call it a learning experience. Everyone agrees it should never happen again. But it probably will. Somewhere, someone is looking at an ecological problem and thinking, what if we just introduced this one species? What could go wrong? And the cycle will continue. Because humans never learn. We think we're smarter than nature. We're not. We never were. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more stories about humans messing with nature and immediately regretting it.